fellow PhD students. My name is Drake, and I will be evaluating the second chapter of Larry Hurtado's book, Destroyer of the Gods. The second chapter focuses primarily on the things that made the Christian religion unique in the ancient Roman Empire. The first thing he points out from the get-go is that the Roman Empire used the term religion a lot differently than we use it today. Today in Western culture, we tend to compartmentalize things, and as such, the idea of religion is treated as its own separate thing, the separate activity that we do. But in the Roman Empire, it was part of everyday life, and it was part of one's identity as an individual. Then from there, he goes on to point out two different things that make the Christian religion unique in the Roman Empire. The first is its rejection of the pluralist view that the Roman Empire had. At the time of the Roman Empire, there were several ethnicities, several people groups, several countries that had been incorporated into the empire, and each had brought their own gods with them. Furthermore, in this particular point in time, participation in religion was very highly tied to ethnicity and to hometowns. And so a person would oftentimes be expected to worship the gods of their ethnicity, the gods of their hometown, the gods of the general Roman pantheon, and they would even frequently pick up other gods during their travels, or even have their own household gods, referred to as Lars. And so when Christianity comes around and says we worship one God and this is the only God we're going to worship, no one else is Lord, that was very countercultural and not very well accepted. Furthermore, this resulted in Christians having to distance themselves from various festivals and social gatherings that were built around the worship of various pagan deities. And Hurtado, he does make some pretty good points about acknowledging the fact that this uniqueness of the Christian religion would have forced a separation between Christians and their pagan relatives and their pagan friends who are actively participating in this pluralistic approach to religion, while they cannot participate due to their views of we worship only one God. A weakness, though, in his arguments is that he seems to present this transition as a lot more instantaneous and clean-cut than it probably would have been. We see from the book of 1 Corinthians that the Christians did not always make that shift right away, but rather the more common change was that it was gradual, it was a matter of maturing, it happened over time. And so to think that the pagan converts to Christianity just on the ball dropped their pluralistic approach to life and adopted a one God approach is problematic. Eventually that approach was adopted. Eventually Christians would have gotten to that spot, but it would not have happened overnight. From there, Hurtado also talks about the ties to ethnicities that religions had in that time, which is certainly true. One of the things, though, that makes Christianity unique is that it's not tied to a specific ethnicity. There is no one people group that is identified as that's the Christian people group. Rather, there are representatives from every people group in the world that exist within Christianity. This lack of tie to an ethnicity would have also been something that made the Christian religion unique. And it's a factor Hurtado picks up on that not every writer really picks up on, and so this was a valuable insight on his part. One other weakness, though, that I would like to address was that Hurtado seems to downplay the role that the imperial cult played in the uniqueness of Christian religion. The imperial cult was a part of Roman religion that worshiped the emperor. Its use, its insistence, ebbed and flowed with who the emperor was. Some emperors were a little more stringent on it, but it still existed through much of the Roman Empire. And failure to participate in the practices of the imperial cult could oftentimes result in a person being branded and accused of sedition and rebellion. And this political connection, combined with the Christian view of we only worship one God, was a source for a lot of persecution for the church. Now, going back to Hurtado's book, he makes the statement that he feels that the imperial cult is oftentimes overcredited in various works for its being a source of Christian persecution and Christian difficulties and Christian struggles in the Roman Empire. However, I feel that Hurtado does the complete reverse, and he doesn't give it enough credit for the unique situation that the Christians found themselves in. Overall, though, the book and the chapter were pretty well written. Hurtado's strength, his good arguments, are that he acknowledges the different role that religion played in the lives of the ancient Romans versus the way it works in our modern day context. He also talks about the social estrangement that Christianity's insistence on only one God would have created for the believers living in the ancient Roman Empire, and also the uniqueness of not being tied to one religion. I mean, Judaism still had that one God thing, but it was at least tied to an ethnicity, and therefore still in some ways fell under the typical view and the typical construct of religion of that time. But Christianity had neither of those, neither the pluralism nor the tie to an ethnicity. Where his arguments were a little weak was on his downplay of the imperial cult and its effects on Christian persecution, and also the way that he paints the transition from the pluralistic pagan viewpoint to the Christian one God viewpoint makes it seem a lot more clean cut and a lot more instantaneous than it really was.